What were you gentlemen doing to prepare for legalization? What was your overall expectation on what you'd be doing? Steve, let's start with you, because
I have a pretty easy answer to that. I was doing nothing to prepare for this. I was retired. I voted against question 4, which I think is well known across the state. I voted against question 4, not because I disagree with the objectives of legalization. I do. I just thought, my God, what a complicated issue and what a very short time frame to implement. And I find it quite ironic that here I am in the seat of implementing this complicated issue in such a short time frame. So I voted against it, and I was happily retired. So I never in a million years imagined I would be in this seat right now. I started preparing for it on the Friday before Labor Day weekend when the treasurer called me. This is Labor Day weekend of 2017. When the treasurer called me and said, how would you like to, actually, for those of you that know the treasurer, she doesn't ask you. She said, this is on a Friday, she said, on Tuesday a press release is going out announcing your appointment as chairman of the commission, and on Wednesday you're having a press conference. So my preparation started that Friday. It included reading the law, because I had not read the law to that point. It included getting trained on how to do press conference, because I'd never done anything in the media before. And it also I did a quick trip to Joseph A. Bank, because I hadn't worn a suit for work in probably 30 years. So I needed a state government wardrobe. That's the extent of my preparation, and the rest of it was trial by fire.
I was working in a small windowless office in a municipal law firm, represented 7 towns as associate town council, had some advisory role related to the siting of medical dispensaries, and had been an enthusiast of the plan itself for 21 years. So in December, I was just starting to think about quitting my job as a lawyer. Frankly, was ready to never be a lawyer again. Was initially intending to get a micro business license myself. Got some sticker shock on what it would cost to make that happen. And then just through the networking, people just started saying, hey, you're a lawyer, why aren't you a cannabis attorney? And I said, you know what, you're right. And I'm super happy I did that. It's absolutely my calling. I am never practicing any other area of law. I don't care. And since I'm the boss now, I get to do what I want. So that's where I was.
Blake, a little follow-up on that. When you got started into doing cannabis work, what did you find the biggest challenge to it?
Well, I guess I was hoping that as a former municipal attorney that I'd have a little more secret sauce in dealing with municipalities. Unfortunately, the way municipal government works is everyone has a million responsibilities and they don't talk to each other between departments. And so while I think about cannabis all day, every day, municipal officials don't. So you have to, I've even had to educate municipal officials on their own regulations. So I had one town administrator say, oh, we have a cap of 3 licenses. And I said, okay, great. Can you just show me the portion of the bylaw that says it? She hands it to me, and the license cap was 14. So they don't know their own regulations, and I don't know if that's calculated or based on prejudice or fear, or just that they have so many other things to do.
All righty. Keith?
Yeah, I also wasn't in the industry or the business. Back then, cannabis was a product, not an industry to me. I was running my 6th high-tech startup as CEO in the Boston area. This one was a digital health company, and out of nowhere we got acquired in the spring of 2017, and I found myself happily retired. And 2 weeks later, I went to a cocktail party. Somebody showed me a cannabis business plan. I said, wow. And 2 days later, I was on an airplane to Colorado and running around the city for 4 days, shopping, talking to people, taking lots of pictures, interviewing customers. And I came back and I said, wow, again. And I found a company that I got very, very intimate with and became CEO of Revolutionary Clinics 18 months ago.
All righty. Let's move forward a little bit to March of 2018. The final set of draft regulations has been drafted and released to the public, and the community devoured them and began their preparations to submit applications at the appointed times. From that point, what did you see as the biggest challenge for potential licensees, aside from host community agreements that we all know are hard anyway? Aside from that, what did you see as being a big hurdle to submitting an application? Keith, you've got your clinic. What did you find the toughest to get done?
Well, look, it's a complicated business, partly because it's new, and we're all trying to figure it out. But there's a number of different layers of regulations and hurdles that you have to pass through. There are two state agencies together today: Cannabis Control Commission, run by Steve, and soon run by Steve, also the Department of Health segment, DPH. Sorry. So both of those regulatory agencies at the state level, you've got to pass muster. And for each and every person, as well as your business plan and processes and locations. Then you have the city level, which is very, very challenging at this stage because people are rightly want to do it right, not rush into it, and many of them aren't quite prepared yet. So you have to go through that whole process to make them understand and get comfortable with you as individuals and you as a business. Then you have the landlords in those cities. That you have to convince that it's a good idea to have a marijuana store or a cultivation facility in their place of business. And then you have the neighborhoods and the people that live around there that you have to convince that it's all okay.
So the answer is basically all.
All. It's very complicated. It takes a long time, much longer than you thought. If you looked at my business plan after I got into this business, I was open for recreational on July 1st, 2017. I was wrong.
2017?
2018.
That's pretty.
Come on, man.
Now, Blake, as a lawyer, certainly you've seen specific things that are going to be hurdles. I know finding real estate, for instance, can be kind of a challenge.
Absolutely. So yeah, with real estate, I think the initial challenge is finding a municipality that didn't enact a moratoria or a ban. There's no super up-to-date list or map of what cities or towns are open. And I mean, obviously as a preliminary matter, you have to fit the zoning in order to even go through any of the regulatory process. So once you identify a property, then you've got landlords looking you in the eye and they say, well, we're taking this big risk, so the rent's 20 to 30% above market rate. And yes, there are some risks. Obviously, it's very clearly federally illegal, but I am not super sympathetic to landlords who are gouging the industry with this, I think very remote possibility of federal enforcement. U.S. Attorney Andrew Lelling announced his enforcement priorities, and they pretty much mirrored what the Cole Memorandum had said before its rescission. And basically, if you're not a cartel, if you're not growing so much that you're intending to sell it across state lines, as long as you're not intending to sell to children, I would say you probably won't have to worry about federal prosecution. But yeah, dealing with some of the stigma, especially in towns where the vote on question 4 was close. In municipal government, the people who are loudest tend to be the people who have the most complaints, and they're willing to show up. I think if you took a cross-section of who shows up at town meeting and compared it to the general population, you'd see it skewed, frankly, to the older demographic. So that's some of the challenges.
Now, Steve, you get the unique opportunity to see some of these applications.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see the applicants having the biggest struggle with completing?
Well, I think it depends on the type of applicant you're talking about. I think that
Well, let's narrow it down and say cultivation.
No, I was talking about after the regulations were promulgated in March of 2018. We opened the window on April 1st for priority applications, so nothing other than getting in front of the queue. And we opened to two groups of people that were already licensed to do medical marijuana, as well as economic empowerment candidates. And so the first applications that we started processing in late April, early May, were those two groups. The medical dispensaries, for the most part, had been in the marijuana business obviously already. They knew the process of working in cities and towns. And while they had questions and we were trying to be as responsive as possible, for the most part they knew the process. The economic empowerment candidates, not exclusively, but to a large extent, this is the first time they've gone through any kind of state licensing process, the first time they've ever dealt with cities and towns. And so they've had a lot of questions. And we got a fair amount. There's 4 packets that have to be submitted before we can process the application. And we got a fair amount of incomplete applications where they submitted 4 packets, but there are significant pieces of information missing from 1 or more of those packets. And our objective is not to say no to people. Our objective is to say, here's what you need to do so we can process the application. So we can.
One of the challenges that we've noticed is a lack of suitable banking in the Commonwealth. And that becomes a factor when these applicants create their companies. What do you guys think can be done to help solve the banking problem outside of the federal treasury deciding to turn a blind eye?
So I'll start. I know it's a big problem. However, from a business standpoint, on a scale of 1 to 10, from my view, it's a 4. A 4 on a scale of 1 to 10 by way of getting in the way of doing business, where most community agreements are a 10, special permits a 10, the application's a 10, the landlords are a 10. This is a 4. And where it becomes most inconvenient for us is most of what we charge to get products and raw materials, not marijuana, but raw materials like vape pens and things, are on my credit card, my personal credit card, and then 2 personal credit cards, and then 3 personal credit cards as we grow. And on any given month, I'm out a couple $100,000 on my credit cards, and I only imagine what the security people at my bank are thinking about the change in my spending patterns. And I'm hoping that when they see that first 100,000 go up and suddenly I pay it down in the middle of the month and we run it up to another 100 grand and I pay it down at the end of the month, that they're thinking I am the most interesting man in the world, not a drug kingpin. So that's really the only place where it's very inconvenient for us as a business.
So I think obviously the FinCEN regulations sort of weed, no pun intended, people out from banking. I think to comply with those regulations, it costs hard dollars to beef up security, to beef up accounting, to jump through the requisite hoops. At the state level, I had a client who owns a physical bank building who was he had asked me to try to figure out how to get a cannabis bank up and running. And I had a conversation with the General Counsel of the Division of Banks, and essentially there's a state law that requires all accounts in this state, whether it's a state chartered only institution, they still have to have FDIC insurance. So obviously the second you mention the word federal, the Controlled Substances Act rears its head, and banks freak out. I had 5 banks turn me away when I tried to open my lawyer's trust account, which is an account I legally have to be a lawyer. And I'm very open and honest and said, yeah, I'm a cannabis attorney, but all my clients are pre-revenue. And they said, well, you said the word cannabis, so get out of here. And so yeah, I yelled at a few bankers around that time, diplomatically, of course. But yeah, I think there's some dominoes that have to fall. Obviously, Gardner Federal Credit Union with the Safe Harbor, sort of like a membership club kind of thing. They pre-screen you and then match you with a participating credit union. And there was a bank down in Swansea, the name is escaping me. Bay Coast, yeah. So there are people stepping up. Century Bank's the only institution in the state handing medical funds. So I think, obviously, it's in everyone's best interest to make this not an all-cash industry.
I guess respectfully, Keith, I think it's a 10. I think this issue is 10. And I obviously am coming at it from a different perspective than you are. From an industry perspective, from a public safety perspective, it's a 10. This cannot continue to be an all-cash industry. It creates all kinds of horrible public safety challenges. I will also say that when you talk about banking, there's 2 parts to banking. There is the cash management part of it, which is a very big public safety issue. There's also the financing and lending. Even GFA and Bay Coast, the 2 banks that have announced they're going to participate in this industry, are doing only cash management. They're not providing any financing into the industry. The simple reason is that their collateral can be seized at any time. And so they, from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint, they can't do it. So we're working this issue incredibly hard because it is a 10 at the state level. And we have spoken at the Mass Banks Association, at the Cooperative Credit Union Association. That's where GFA and Swan and Bay Coast first started the dialogue. We're not trying to convince any bank to do it. They can't. It's not in our purview. What we are trying to do is say, here's how we're regulating this industry. Here's how we're going to enforce those regulations. Here's how we're tracking inventory. Our seed-to-sale tracking has an API that any bank, you mentioned how expensive it is to bank this business. Any bank can actually link into our seed-to-sale tracking to track the inventory and transactions of their customers, which makes some of the paperwork a lot easier. So we're working this process. I know of, and I'm not going to mention names, I know of a half a dozen other banks in the state that are seriously considering entering, and I suspect will. Colorado, it took better part of 4 years, but after 4 years, Colorado is about 80% bank. There are 5 banks in Colorado that are participating in this industry. I'm hoping that we can dramatically speed up that timeline, and so far so good, but I think it's a gigantic issue, one that myself and the other members of the commission are obsessively focused on getting it right.
It's actually a pretty incredible issue for my nonprofit, the Mass Grower Advocacy Council. We get denied bank accounts because they hear the word cannabis, and other banks deny us an account because they hear the word political. Honest to God, we've gone through, I don't know how many. It's crazy. Moving on. Now it's December 2018. We have a few retailers open. As a matter of fact, in Salem today, and adult use cultivations are underway. Supplies are what they are, which aren't very liberal when you consider they're being limited to like 1/8 of an ounce, and they try to spread it out so everybody's got a chance to get some. What do you gentlemen think it's going to take to meet demand in the market? Is it going to take more retailers, more cultivators and manufacturers, or both? Where's the real bottleneck in the supply? Keith, you probably know this one best.
So today, obviously, it's retail. You see the long lines, which were inevitable when you've got such an incredible demand and novelty and excitement, and you've got 2 stores open. And 3 stores open, Steve. 50% difference. If you do the math. So it's retail today, but that's changing quickly thanks to the CCC's activities. I think if there were, and it's evolving, the wholesale market now is evolving to supply retailers, and I think when that becomes more efficient, we're actually at a pretty good place by way of supply and demand as it relates to product. Again, not retail stores, but product. Because there's an active wholesale market today. So that tells you today, in the medical community, I think there's 57,000 patients that are signed up, 38,000 were active in November, on average 38,000 ounces or something like that. If you do the math, and then you looked at the square feet of canopy out there, it's actually nicely balanced. It's just a little bit of an inefficient market because there wasn't a wholesale market before 6 months ago. As that evolves and people decide to be wholesalers or vertically integrated or just retailers, I think it'll even out. I think one of the best decisions that Steve and his group made were to keep the cultivation scale at a reasonable level. 100,000 square feet of canopy is a big facility. I mean, a really big facility. It's a couple 100,000 square feet, very expensive to build out. So there won't be many of those, but that stops actually there being oversupply in the marketplace. And that was one of the best
It also stops monopoly.
And stops monopoly, that's right.
Well,
As
of
per the limited
course, the
licenses.
legislation is that we are required to help small farmers and co-ops, and so that was certainly part of the logic behind it.
I loved that part, Steve. I really did.
I'd like to say that it's because I'm a forward-thinking guy, and I am, but it's the law. So we weren't given any discretion on that topic, but I think it was the right thing to have in the law.
Well, while we've got you, you get to see how the licensing is playing out.
Sure.
Where do you think more attention should be paid to people who don't know exactly what kind of license they want yet? I mean, where do you see a lack of fulfillment in a particular area?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. We did give priority to RMDs and to economic empowerment candidates. We have authorized a large range of licenses. The places where I'm seeing less activity than I was hoping for, micro businesses is one example, where I think, when we talk about barriers to entry into the industry, that's one place where the barriers are substantially lower in terms of application for licensing. We haven't seen too many micro business applications, and that's a little bit of a concern. I think the balance between cultivation, manufacturing, and retail feels about right. We have a third lab that we give final license to at our meeting on Thursday. We probably need another couple of labs, I would think, around the state. But now shortly we'll have 3, and for the current level of activity, that's sufficient. So I'm not too concerned about that. I am not concerned, but I am very interested in continuing the dialogue that we're committed to do by February of this 2019, which is social consumption and home delivery. both have, I think, pretty important social equity impacts in terms of the social consumption for people that can't smoke at home because they live in a landlord building with law prohibits smoking at living buildings, subsidized housing. That's not. Delivery is a licensed category that is very low barrier to entry from a capital standpoint compared to the other ones. So I think we've got some more work to do on that. But, I agree with Keith. I think that, basically the industry is kind of evolving in a balanced way, although we'll see over time.
I think, obviously, cultivation is going to have to ramp up. I don't think there's enough plants in the ground today to satisfy the demand. Obviously, the retail is the end point where people can make the purchase. But I think that's going to come along pretty quickly. I believe the CEO of American estimated the state would need between 2 and 3 million square feet of canopy to satisfy the entire state's demand. So I don't think we're anywhere near that today. And one thing Chairman Hoffman just said that sort of triggered a thought. So for the micro businesses, as well as the economic empowerment applicant categories, there's some equity restrictions that I think have limited the attractiveness for investors. For a micro business, you have to have 51% of the folks be from Massachusetts and lived here for the last 12 months. A lot of money is coming from out of state, and that's an entire class of licenses that out-of-state people just aren't looking into. I think it's a great license type. I think it offers lower costs of entry, although still exorbitantly expensive. But then, similarly in the economic empowerment context, requiring that certificate holder to have 51% is the right thing to do. It's just a hard sell for people writing, huge checks.
So I think I agree with you completely, Blake, and that to me really underscores the need to find alternative sources of equity to blend into the market. So I agree with you.
All right, gentlemen, for the sake of time, we will take 3 questions. So if you have a question,
I think we have more than 3 questions here, Peter.
start with the beard.
All right. Just want to stand up, and I just want to introduce myself. My name's Ed D'Souza, and I'm asking this question as an advocate for the cannabis community, but also a patient in the state and a small business owner trying to get his license in this industry. Can we just admit that things should have been done a little bit differently? Like, let's focus on small businesses instead of conglomerates. Let's focus on new industry instead of the RMDs going over to the rack. They should have been cultivation first to build a supply. Then you can go ahead and have your retail. Right now, we have RMDs that are getting their licenses, taking their medical supply for patients, and turning it over to make a buck. We're playing immaculate conception right now because that's done under the medical guidelines. It wasn't done under the 501 guidelines.
You want to have to respond? You're looking at me, so I presume you're
only because I'm a small businessman.
Sorry?
I'm a small businessman who did everything. I created zoning in Newburyport. Mm-hmm. I got my special permit in Newburyport. Yep. I got my community host agreement in Newburyport. And I got kicked out of my warehouse because of prohibition. I'm out. I had a second mortgage on my house because of this. And all I see are the same people that make money over and over and over again. When are we going to focus on the little guy?
Thank you. I understand your question. I mean, this is going to sound a little bit like dodging my responsibility, but you need to talk to your legislator. Is what you need to do. Wait, let me finish. I gave you a chance, and let me give you a chance as well. Legislation required us to give priority to 2 groups of people: to licensed RMDs and to economic empowerment candidates. It didn't say maybe. It didn't say do the small business person first. It said you have to commission, give priority to those 2 candidates, those 2 classes of applicants. We did. We are very focused on making sure that there is no disruption to the medical market, which was one of your questions. And so the amount of inventory that can be transferred from medical to adult use is limited by the Department of Public Health at 45%. We have a requirement for all the people that are opening co-located medical and adult use facilities that maintain a sufficient level of inventory to ensure that they are able to provide for their patients. And thus far, in the 2 that have opened and the one that's open today, we have ensured that patients do not have to wait in line. They go right to the front of the queue and they are served. So from a patient standpoint, we're doing it, I think, right. We're focused on it. If we need to make adjustments, we will. But the law was that RMDs got priority. We are not lawmakers, we are regulators. Our job is to implement the law. If you have issues with the way the law was written, that's not something I can change or we can change by ourselves. We also have explicit responsibility in the legislation to make this into a diverse industry, and diversity has multiple dimensions to it. So one dimension of diversity is an industry that is populated by women, minorities, veterans, LGBT, disabled people that look like the state of Massachusetts. It also has a requirement that it's diverse in terms of big companies and small companies. As I said earlier, we're incentivizing farmers and co-ops. We are going to have this industry look the way it should look. It's not easy. As I said, the RMDs have gone through this process before. They know how to work with cities and towns. They've got capital. It's easier for them. But I got appointed for 5 years. And the reason I got appointed for 5 years, aside from the fact that I'm a masochist, the reason I got appointed for 5 years is it's going to take a couple of years for this industry to evolve to look the way we want it to look like. So we're going to get to where it needs to look like in terms of diversity, but we're also just following the law.
All right, guys, that's our time. I thank you all for coming out.